The Barefoot Lawyer Reports is proud to feature the art of Chen Guangcheng, a human rights activist whose sculptures depict the struggle for democracy and freedom in China. His work is displayed at Liberty Sculpture Park in Yermo, California, which Chen Guangcheng recently visited. You can view pictures of Guangcheng's art at catholic.edu/chr.
Hi, this is William Saunders. I am the director of the Center for Human Rights at Catholic University of America. And on this edition of the Barefoot Lawyer podcast, we're talking to one of the winners of our essay contest. The essay contest was about the state of political and social life in China under the Chinese Communist Party and what could or couldn't be done and should or shouldn't be done to improve things for the people. And so I'm joined today by Jose Nunes. Jose, why don't you tell the listeners who you are?
Happy to do so, Dr. Saunders. So my name is Jose Nunes. I'm originally from São Paulo, Brazil. I'm a lawyer. I have a background in commercial law and international commerce. And before coming here to the US, I worked for a year and a half as legal advisor for a Brazilian politician. And then I decided to quit my job to continue my academic studies here in the US. So I moved to Washington, DC, late August of last year in order to pursue the MA in Human Rights organized by the Institute of Human Ecology here at the Catholic University of America.
Yeah, and I'm the director of that program. So anybody listening who wants to learn about that program, which has American USA students and as well as students from foreign countries like Jose, you can find it on the website, which is catholic.edu/CHR for the Center for Human Rights. Well, let's talk about the essay contest, Jose, and about the subject of the essay contest. And I want you to start out by telling us who is Little Li.
Okay, so Little Li was a Chinese girl who was who after the communists took over, she was a Catholic girl who was attending mass, and all of a sudden a group of communist soldiers stormed into the church, dispersing the crowd and imprisoning the priest. So Little Li, she went home that day, and for nearly 30 days after that incident happened, she would sneak into the church to take the holy hosts that were spread out on the floor by the Chinese communist soldiers who violated the chapel of that church. And her acts of bravery were witnessed by the priest of that particular church. And at a certain night, she took the holy host, and actually what she was gonna do, she would press her tongue against the floor in order not to touch the holy host with her hands. And without realizing, she caught the attention of a communist soldier who shot her to death. And this story is portrayed in the autobiography of Bishop Fu Tongxin, and it's a source of inspiration both for Catholics and non-Catholics who fight against human rights violations all over the world.
Why don't you tell us about your essay and what was your argument in the essay, which was based or illustrated by the heroism of Little Li?
So the gist of my essay was to try to show how it is the case that natural law is not a Western construct. So regardless of your of your nationality or ethnicity, it is possible to grasp the existence of some fundamental truths that orient how human beings should behave and organize in society. So every single civilization that has ever existed in the world recognized the importance of human life in different degrees, the centrality of marriage to sustain social life. So the bulk of my argument was to show how it's the case that in the case of China, they can return to their own natural law tradition, which is symbolized in the notion of the Tao, and how it's the case that the American political experiment can be used as a source of inspiration for the contemporary Chinese to rediscover his own natural law tradition. So that's pretty much what I try to convey with my article.
Yeah, and for those listening, religious freedom that Little Lee died for is non-existent within China today and the CCP. And everybody from the Uyghurs to the Tibetan Buddhists to the Christians to the Falun Gong, who anybody with a point of reference that's beyond the Chinese Communist Party is oppressed. And we've talked about this on other podcasts. We've had, for instance, Bob Fu, who's the head of China Aid and one of our close friends on here. So, Jose, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that it's possible for China to recover the natural law tradition in a sense that they have in under this government?
I believe so. I tend to be optimistic because ultimately truth will prevail in the end, right? So I think that one of the weapons that the enemies of freedom try to use is discouragement and fear, and they certainly have a lot of power and money to back their threats. But we should never lose faith in the capacity of ordinary people to organize and to resist oppression. So, for instance, one of the things that you discussed with us in class was how back in the mid-'80s, nobody had any idea that the Soviet Union would collapse by the end of the '80s. And that did happen, and it was thanks to the effort of people like John Paul II, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and thanks to the effort of the many people who struggled behind the Iron Curtain. So I do think that the Chinese people have to stick to their own natural law tradition embodied in the notion of the Tao, and it's important for Western powers such as the United States to support the efforts of the Chinese people against oppression. And not only the Chinese people, but it's also important to support those people who are threatened by the imperialistic motives of China all over the world, particularly in Africa and in Latin America.
Jose, you mentioned what we talked about in class, and I want to first, that's correct, and everybody listening should realize, because most of you listening are much younger than I am. I was alive in 1988, 1989, and nobody thought the Berlin Wall or the collapse of communism in Europe was going to happen. Everybody thought it'd be 100 years of détente between the East and the West. And instead, the wall collapsed. So what seems like something that can't be changed, which is the CCP's control of the Chinese people, can change tomorrow. We will not know that until it happens. So we must work for it all the time. But also, of course, as one of my students, Jose had the privilege of of hearing from Chen Guangcheng, our Barefoot lawyer, our distinguished fellow here at the Center for Human Rights, and for whom the podcast is named. And anybody who doesn't know already his story can find it at our webpage again at the catholic.edu/CHR, where you can also sign up for these podcasts. So, Jose, do you want to say anything about your meeting or interactions or learning from Chen Guangcheng?
Sure. So, I think Guangcheng provides an inspirational example of how it is possible for the ordinary person to stand against oppression. So Chen Guangcheng has a very interesting and inspiring story that is portrayed in the book The Barefoot Lawyer, which shows how he first got involved advocating for human rights in China, and how he became enemy of the Chinese, of the CCP ultimately. So interacting with Chen Guangcheng is kind of like having a eyewitness account of what it's like to do real boots on the ground human rights work. So I would say he's probably the Chinese version of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. So he's probably the Solzhenitsyn of China. So it was a one of a kind experience, and I would say that having the opportunity to interact with him and learn from him is one of the many high points of the MA in human rights here at CUA.
Yeah, it is a great opportunity for everybody. So again, anybody listening, if you happen to be interested in this master's program, or if you know people who you think would be interested in it, or people who, because part of the program is studying with Guangcheng, you should go to the webpage and start the application process. He is inspiration for what we are doing. And I also want to mention to everybody listening that we will have this essay contest. We'll have an essay contest again. And I hope that you will encourage students, whether they're college or high school or graduate students, to apply or to enter the contest, because one of our main purposes here is to help the American people to understand what life is like under communist China, and also through our website to understand the threat that Chinese Communist Party poses to the United States and to democracy. So in the essay contest, people like Jose thought about democracy and how it's missing in China and what could happen. I'm really glad that Jose mentioned the Tao, because if those of you who've ever read C.S. Lewis, you'll know that he uses that as well, and he's one of the most influential writers, at least in English, of the last 100 years. So this is an important concept. Natural law is not just a Greek idea. In a sense, it corresponds to common sense, which is that we can know, and that by knowing we can understand how to act in harmony with the universe and with other people, and to make judgments. But in any case, Jose, anything you'd like to share for the people listening about the subject of this essay contest, or your own essay? What would you like them to learn from it?
So there are 2 points that I raise in my essay that I'd like to stress. So first of all is the danger of Marxism, or anything that evolved from Marxism. So I think I draw the comparison. I say that Marxism is a kind of virus, and we just went through the COVID crisis, and after COVID, there were many variants arising, such as the Delta variant, the Omicron variant, and I think that this is a good symbol to make sense of how influential Marxism is up to this day in the world. So there are many things that in the middle of the 20th century arose out of Marxism. So there's the Frankfurt School variant, the Chinese variant, the Nicaraguan variant. So it's necessary to realize that Marxism nowadays presents itself in a less dogmatic way. Instead, it presents itself as a kind of spirit in a more diffused way, and it can even instrumentalize things that are constituent of the patrimony of the church, such as the notion of social justice that has to be properly understood within the tradition of the Catholic social teaching, as it was emphasized by Pope John Paul II. There are people that use the notion of human rights to justify abortion all across the world. So it's necessary for us to examine these ideas, acknowledge them when they manifest themselves, and defeat them politically. The other thing I'd like to stress is the danger that China represents not only to the Chinese people, but also to the people in Africa, in Latin America. So a couple of years ago, the Chinese Communist Party launched an initiative called the Silk Road Initiative. And with that initiative, China has been building infrastructure in the underdeveloped and developing countries, particularly in Africa and Latin America. So I think that governments in Africa and Latin America have to be extremely careful on the kinds of deals that they're gonna cut with the Chinese Communist Party, because at the end of the day, it might be the case that they're going to rely more and more on Chinese investment, and they might fall prey to the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. So any decision to enter into any kind of agreement with China has to be diligently examined, and it's important to have people, good lawyers, economists, advisors, aware of the dangers posed by the Chinese Communist Party and how to combat them.
Well, Jose, thank you very much. I invite the listener to go to our website page and read Jose's essay, as well as the essays of the other two prize winners. Again, you can find it at catholic.edu/CHR for Center for Human Rights, catholic.edu/Center for Human Rights. And Jose, I thank you for joining us today, and invite the listener to come back for the next podcast.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saunders. It was a pleasure.
The Barefoot Lawyer Reports is proud to announce the publication of a research paper from the Center for Human Rights. It addresses the establishment of illegal policing and surveillance stations by the Chinese Communist Party in America and other countries. To read this research paper, go to catholic.edu/CHR and go to our Research and Analyses page.